Your eyes, a gift from God. Hard to imagine life without them. But you can't always trust what you see. Life is full of things that can't be seen with the naked eye. That's where God comes in. We see a problem, He sees a solution. We see weakness, He sees strength. As you're looking for answers, keep one thing in mind. You'll need more than eyes to see the things that matter. Believing is seeing.
When we speak of the natural, we're talking about things in accordance with the laws that God has established by which the world works. Science can exist because there are natural laws that through the process of observation and testing have been deemed to be consistently dependable so that we can live our lives based on those laws. We call them the laws of nature. But when we talk about the supernatural, we're talking about when God trumps His own laws. When God rises above His own laws to do something outside of those laws to demonstrate that He is not limited to the natural of His laws, but is in fact supernatural. That is, He can supersede His own laws as He so chooses. In this series, we're calling Believing is Seeing, Experiencing the Supernatural. We are discovering and have discovered already how God works based on faith to do things outside of the natural scheme and order of nature. Today is no different, but with a twist. Jesus Christ, according to chapter 2, verse 1, has come back to Capernaum. He's come back. That means He was already there. Let me summarize what's been going on with Jesus. He's hit a stride. Jesus right now has hit a stride, and He's riding a wave of popularity. Chapter 1, verse 37, Simon and the companions find Him, and they said to Him, "Everybody looking for you. Where you go? You've gone off. Everybody's looking for you." Jesus responds by saying in chapter 1, verse 38, "Let us go somewhere else to the towns nearby so that I can preach there also, for that is what I came for." In other words, the folk want my miracles, they don't want my sermons. So Jesus Christ takes a break from Capernaum. But after He takes his break, He comes back. And that opens up this most staring story. Stay with me. I think you will find some unique things here for your experience of the supernatural. Many were gathered together so that, verse 2, there was no longer room, not even near the door, as He was speaking to them. And in the midst of His sermon, something takes place. And they came bringing to Him a paralytic carried by 4 men. They came bringing to Him a paralyzed individual. Now, if he's paralyzed, he can't walk. For one reason or another, his muscles have stopped working, his limbs have stopped functioning, and he is stuck in a condition he can't get himself out of. He is paralyzed. Here we have a man who is in a hopeless situation, and let me tell you how you can know when you're in a hopeless situation. You know you're in a hopeless situation when you can't get out of it by yourself. He can't get out of this. He can't move on his own. Now, there are a lot of kind of paralysis that goes on. There is the obvious one, physical paralysis, but you can be mentally paralyzed, stuck in a mindset you can't shake. You can be circumstantially paralyzed by situations you can't get out of. You can be paralyzed by an addiction. You can be paralyzed by another person. Whatever it is, it's locked you in, holds you hostage, and you can't budge. You're stuck. Such was this man. He was paralyzed. And even if you're not paralyzed, you know some folk who are. And the reason you know they're paralyzed is for 10 years, it ain't changed. For 10 years, they haven't budged. For 10 years, they're complaining about how it is. But it never gets any better. He's paralyzed. But the story introduces us to 4 other people. Now, we don't know their names, their backgrounds, and their history. But it says that 4 men took this man to the house. 4 men took this man for Jesus to remove his paralysis. Now, right there, we're informed of a lot. Number one, we're informed that there were 4 people in this man's life who cared about his condition. Even though he couldn't move, there were 4 men who cared for him enough, we'll call them his small group. So they cared for him, but they knew where to take him. They said, if we can get homeboy to Jesus, then we believe his circumstances in life can change. Now, I don't know how long he'd been paralyzed, but however long it was, he was a grown man who couldn't stand on his own 2 feet. And you know anything about men like that? Grown man, but he can't stand on his own 2 feet. You didn't hear me. A grown man, but he can't stand on his own 2 feet. But he did have some brothers in his life who helped him stand up. So they carried him. Jesus is preaching. The 4 carry the 1, and here's what we read. Being unable to get him, verse 3, in to Jesus because of the crowd, they removed the roof above him, and when they had dug an opening, they let down the pallet on which the paralytic was lying. They lowered him right smack dab in front of Jesus. What does that tell us? That tells us that they were not going to stop until something changed. This was not casual commitment. This was some brothers who said, we're going to fight for you until we get you to the one who can change you. So before I go any further, I need to ask you, everybody in here should be in one of 2 positions. You either are a paralytic, so you're in a situation you can't fix on your own, or you ought to be somebody's friend so that you can reach down and help somebody else get to where they need to be. Because one day you may be the paralytic, and you may need some folk in your circle, your group, who will not just leave you there to languish there, but will reach down and help you get to where you need to go. You ought to be in one of the 2 categories. But today, unfortunately, we live in a day when people are just looking for their blessing. Our series is called Believing is Seeing. Watch this. Jesus seeing their faith, not hearing them talk about their faith, not examining their feelings of faith. Seeing, in other words, this was a visible faith. It was faith, but it was faith in motion, faith moving, faith that you could see, not just talking faith. Remember our definition of biblical faith. For the believer, it is acting like God is telling the truth. It's acting like it is so even when it's not so, in order that it might be so simply because God said so. That is biblical faith. Biblical faith involves movement. That's why it's called walking by faith. And Jesus visualized their faith. He's feeling this thatch falling on his head. He's looking up, seeing this guy lower down, and he's watching faith at work. Key word. Watch this. There. Not his. There. When he saw their faith. Now, the paralytic had a little bit of faith. One, because he's in the word there, and it's 5 guys, it's 4 guys plus the paralytic. But he had faith enough for the 4 to pick him up, hoist him up, and drop him down. So he had faith enough to relinquish himself into the care of caring people who were willing to trust God for him and with him until his change came. Because sometime when you've been hurt deep enough, long enough, and strong enough, you don't have enough faith to believe it can happen for you. You hear Jesus has done it for all these other folk, but you're not sure he can do it for you until some folks show up who believe where you can't believe, trust where your trust has become weak, and are willing to bring you to Jesus. He says, son, your sins are forgiven. There's a whole story there. We don't know the details of the story, but we know this much. There was a direct correlation between his sin and his circumstances. Okay? There was something wrong spiritually in his life that led to and kept him in his paralysis. So watch this. Before Jesus dealt with his circumstances, he dealt with his spiritual reality. What you have to understand is, and not all negative circumstances are due to our personal sin. Jesus says, in this world you will have tribulation. Some are just life's realities, where life has realities to them. But he specifically says, mister, before I change your circumstances, I have to deal with your spiritual condition. So what does that mean? It means the first thing you want to make sure of when you're asking for your blessing, your miracle, your supernatural presence, is that the spiritual has been addressed, that you're coming before God and giving him the freedom to address sin so that now he's free to address circumstances. Son, your sin has been forgiven. So this man was willing to entrust himself to folk who could get him to Jesus. You know, we want to entrust ourselves to folk who got connections. We want to entrust ourselves to folk who have a big name. We want to entrust ourselves to folk who have power, folk who have money, who have absolutely nothing or no concern about our spiritual condition, but in the world, they got a little something, something, so we want to entrust ourselves to them. You better find some folk in your life who know how to get a hold of Jesus and who are willing to open up the roof until they get you to the one who can deal with the spiritual. Because Jesus know all them other folk who can help you. That means that the paralytic was willing to take that risk. He was willing to take the risk these boys weren't going to drop him, and that Jesus could help him. Now, your sins are forgiven. He hadn't touched the man's circumstances. Man's still paralyzed. But his spiritual condition is now right. And that's what you want. You want the spiritual to be right so that God is free for the circumstances in accordance with his will. Well, the scribes were sitting there. These are the note takers. They're sitting there and they're saying in everyday colloquial English, say what? Because he says, they said, the scribes were sitting there reasoning in their hearts. That means thinking to themselves. Why does this man speak this way? He is blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone? Translation, this man is out of his mind. Talking about your sins are forgiven, acting like he God. Oh, well. Immediately, Jesus, aware in his spirit that they were reasoning that way within themselves, said to them, why are you reasoning about these things in your heart? Now, they should have known something was different when he told them what they were thinking. Okay, they're reasoning in their heart, and he's going to come up and tell them, y'all were just thinking about how could I do this since God could only do this. That ought to have been a clue. And then he asked a question. Now, this is a great question. Jesus says, verse 9, which is easier, to say to the paralytic, your sins are forgiven, or to say, get up and pick up your pallet and walk? Watch this now. God, Jesus says, this is what we're going to do. What we're going to do, guys, is verse 10, but so that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth in history to forgive sins, he said to the paralytic, I say to you, get up, pick up your pallet, and go home. Now watch. Stay with me here. When God deals with you and me spiritually, which means he's been free to address our sin, and we deal with that as first and primary, the spiritual comes first, freeing him up to then, just like it takes supernatural work for God to forgive, to address our circumstances. Once he addresses our circumstances, take up your pallet and walk. The reason that he does the supernatural in the circumstances that people can see is to show them he also can deal with the spiritual that you can't see. So when God breaks through and does something outside of nature, he does it so that you become a testimony to everybody watching that the God who deals with what you can see is the God who will deal with the more important thing that you can't see, because God is first interested in the spiritual over the circumstantial, but he'll do the circumstantial so that you will know the spiritual, because the goal of the circumstantial is to bring you into relationship to the spiritual so that you have a relationship with him, the one who you saw do the physical. So when some of you begin to live this life of faith and you watch God break through, he ain't just breaking through for you. He's not just breaking through so that you can feel better, live better, walk better, talk better, spin better. He's breaking through for you so that other folk can see that Jesus Christ is Lord, that he is God, and that you are in spiritual relationship with him, which freed him up to do what they could see. In other words, your individual faith led to public sight to draw public sight back into your individual faith, your invisible faith. And when he did that, it says that the man got up immediately. Now, let me tell you the secret of when you can pretty much know you're involved in the supernatural. It's not the only way God works, but it is the dominant way God works. When you can know there's something, this ain't natural, okay? Because sometimes things you think are supernatural, you wonder, well, was this supernatural or was this just the natural working out of things, okay? So sometimes you're not sure, okay? But let me tell you when you can be like, sure. It's the word immediately. Sometimes the Bible calls it suddenly. Okay? That means out of nowhere. That means, where'd that come from? That means, whoo, I ain't see that coming. That's when God swoops down. How you gonna be paralyzed for 38 years and then just jump up immediately? Come on, I need some doctor, I need a medicine, I need some surgery. But don't tell me immediately. I got my spiritual life right with God, and out of nowhere, God comes in and somebody calls me for a job immediately. I got my life right with God, and now I got my life right with God. I don't have to chase nobody. Somebody found me immediately. And when God comes out of nowhere, because you're in touch with him, and suddenly, immediately, he told him, get up. Now, the man had a responsibility, because Jesus gave the command, but he had to get up. So he had a responsibility. God's miracle involved him without it being dependent upon him, because Jesus had already spoken the word to him. So you know it's the miraculous when, out of nowhere, God enters into the situation because you've been made right with him. That's not the only way he does it, but that's a way you can know that the supernatural has intervened into your circumstance. And it closes by saying, so they were all amazed and were glorifying God, saying, we have never, ever seen anything like this. Do you have some faith God can see? I ain't talking about you talking. I ain't talking about waving your hand in the air like you just don't care. I ain't talking about that. I'm talking about where you are moving in faith, or if you can't, getting other folk to help you move in faith so that God can see y'all's faith. He saw their faith. That's why you need to be connected. You need to be connected so that where your faith is weak, you can add to somebody else. Where their faith is weak, you can add to them, they can add to you, and God sees group faith, and that's when he sees even broader collection faith. You see more happening in the community and in the nation because God sees that the group is serious, so then that means he's going to respond to faith. God responds to faith that is visible. But as you seek your supernatural presence of God, let me warn you. Let me tell you the whole truth. Let me warn you. See, when you go to the hospital and you say, this is wrong, whatever that wrong is, this is wrong with me. My back's hurting, my stomach's hurting, my head's hurting. All you have given them are symptoms. You told them how you feel. So they got the symptoms, back, stomach, head. They're not going to let it go at that. Just in case you haven't been to the hospital. They will hear you pray to them about your symptom. Back hurting, head hurting, stomach hurting. But then what they're going to do is go deeper. X-ray here, scan there. Because they know your symptom may simply be the fruit and not the root of what's really wrong. Your head may be hurting because there's a tumor. You don't know it's a tumor, you just know the symptom that it's hurting. But they're going to go deeper to find out what's really wrong. When you come to God, he's going to deal with what's really wrong. Not that camouflage stuff. And he's not going to do what many in the Christian faith do. He's not going to give you a placebo. Make you think you're getting something real when it ain't nothing in it but water. He's not going to give you a placebo because he wants you really healed. He wants you really well. He wants you really transformed. And if that means surgery, he wants to do surgery. And if that means a scope, he wants to give you a scope. Why? Because he's not just trying to fix your symptoms. You can go to Walgreens for that. He's trying to deal with the cause, give you the cure so that he heals you from the root so that now you can be blessed with the fruit. So the question is, do you really want to get made well? Or are you like the crowd? You want to be in the house, but you don't want to exercise the faith. If the truth were told, sometimes we have trouble believing. We have trouble exercising the faith that we may want to exercise, but it just seems to escape us. Well, I want you to use the strategy of Mark chapter 2, those first 12 verses, because here was a man who was in a situation he couldn't fix. But he got a few of his homeboys, a few of his buddies, a few of his friends, and they lifted him up, cut a hole in the roof, and dropped him down before Jesus. And it says, when Jesus saw their faith, he healed the man. In fact, he healed him not only physically, but healed him spiritually. Your sins are forgiven. You see, sometimes we need some help. And that's why you must be in a community of people whose faith you can piggyback on when your faith is too weak to go on its own. It would be great if in every situation we had this awesome confidence in God, but sometimes circumstances have made our spiritual immune system weak, and we just can't get there on our own. It even takes faith to entrust yourself to others who have the faith that you need to piggyback on, because this man had to allow them to pick him up, hoist him up, trust them not to drop him as they lowered him through the roof of the house, and believe that it would make a difference. Well, if you do not have some spiritual people in your life who you could lean on. I remember one time a gentleman coming to my office who was desperate, but who was weak in faith. And he just grabbed me and held on to me with tears running down his eyes, and he wanted me to believe with him because he couldn't just get it there on his own. And so I lent him what I had because he even had faith to look for faith. So make sure you don't let your weak faith stop you from getting together with others who can hoist you up as long as they're taking you to Jesus.
For most Christians, acting on your faith can be scary because it means trusting something your eyes can't always see. Tony Evans reminds us that what we see with our eyes is not as reliable as what God reveals through His Spirit. Today's message is part of an 8-part teaching series called Believing is Seeing, and you can obtain your copy by making a donation of any amount at tonyevans.org.